were sitting there watching this on the news were like scratching their head, basically doing the equivalent of WTF. And if you know what that means, you can ask me after the show. So I think it's safe to say that because there seemed to be so much misinformation, or maybe even some disinformation, as to why and what happened, you saw the level of interest that this particular event garnered. That being said, this was already a highly politicized environment. The president had already come under political fire from his opponents in the Senate and in the House. And were people looking for a smoking gun? Yeah, they were. But at the same time, I think rather than dealing with this and addressing it on its merits and being straightforward, what they did was they threw some gas on the fire. The other thing that I would say is that having been a part of a number of investigations, never any congressional, but a number of accident investigations over the years, it's never one thing. It's always a number of things. The world functions as a system. This is something that Donald Trump hasn't figured out yet. That there's never just one thing that you can do without there being some consequences down the road. Some of them planned, some of them unplanned, and it's the unplanned ones that you really got to worry about. This is a bad situation. I think Congressman Gowdy said it best today, that this wasn't about one person. This is about the 4 people that died. Trying to get a good set of answers as to what happened, and leaving it to others to come to their own conjectures as to who was at fault and why. He said twice, my job that's given to me by Speaker Boehner and his successor was to basically figure out what happened and get to the facts of that. And a number of the Democrats said that we got left out. No, they were invited. They didn't want to do the investigation. They felt that enough questions had been answered. Well, tell that to the families of the people who were left standing. They weren't happy with what had been said, and so this man got charged with the job of trying to figure out what happened.
And he did. But here's my question: we've got a report. What are we doing with it now? And I say that because the House left last week. The Senate leaves on Thursday. I believe the Senate has possibly 8 days between now and August. Who knows what's going to happen when the House comes back next week? I expect a full sit-on to happen again. What happens? We have spent millions of dollars on this report. People lost their lives. But what is the next step? And that's what's frustrating to me, is we're going to be talking about this while we don't have a budget. I'm not saying people shouldn't have lost their lives. I really think that's important. How are we going to make changes so it doesn't happen again?
Well, and that's worth noting that the politics that surrounds this is always at play. Back in 2003, the Bush administration had just touted, after its war on terror had begun, that terrorism stats were down. Well, little did the White House realize that there's an annual global terrorism report produced by the State Department, which came out, I believe, a month or two later. And lo and behold, terrorist attacks were not down. They were up significantly. They did take a response. They stopped doing the report.
I think. Addition, you should note too that on the heels of 9/11, when the 9/11 Commission was formed, the Republican Party did not want that commission to be formed. They pushed against it, but I think in the face of unrelenting pressure from the public, we want to know who did what and how. And so what came out of that report, and my comments, I think, are to address your question. Changes were made. One of the changes, arguably, we like or dislike, it was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Do you feel more secure because DHS is up there? I leave it to you to answer. But the point that I'm making is, I think that today the report came out. I don't think that the changes that are going to be incorporated across multiple departments are going to happen tomorrow or next week. It's going to take some time for people to sit back, analyze what's been done, to go back and look for the holes in the system, because apparently there are some holes, so that we can address this. And one thing we already talked about was the fact that we had a military base in Moda, Spain, had one in Turkey, but you also had one in Italy. And if you're going to basically put a U.S. ambassador in harm's way without sufficient cover, somebody needs to answer that question, why? This report wasn't designed to do that.
Well, but, all right, you brought up 9/11. So 9/11 happens in September of 2001. In 2004, there was a piece of legislation. It was the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 that implemented part of the 9/11 recommendations. The second piece of legislation was it was actually called the Implementing Recommendations of the 9/11 Commission Act that came out in 2007. Okay, we're now in 2016. The majority of those recommendations that were put into law in 2004 and in 2007 have not actually come to fruition. And that's why I'm frustrated, because Congress passes laws, so you have reports, and then you have legislation, and that's if you're lucky, because a lot of times we have incidents and the legislation does not occur. But what's happened recently, I think in the past 10 to 15 years, is even though there has been legislation mandating change, nothing has changed. And so I would just urge folks to have a wake-up call and say, look, if we truly want something to happen, then you have to act on it, because this will then be put on this shelf, and that's where I think this is headed.
I guess I would add, I don't believe that nothing has changed, but I understand what you're saying. Al Moore.
I mean, it came out today. Before we condemn its future, let's let it play out. They make a lot of recommendations here. It as Gowdy said, what we tried to do was respond to national needs to know what happened, and to the requests of the family. Right. They were getting mixed signals, mixed information from various sources, and they talked about trying to be responsive to the major issues that the family had. And they make some host of recommendations here, and let's wait and see. After most disasters, man-made disasters or others, there are investigations, there are reports, sometimes multiple investigations, and usually there are some things that happen. They don't happen immediately, and I'm just not willing to simply say it's headed for the shelf. What's going to be done? We haven't even had a chance to look at it yet ourselves. I think it's unfortunate that it played out the way it did, and some of it, in terms of the early going, the creation of the committee, it's clear that there were some Republicans who were overreaching here on the politics. Remember, all of this stuff happened about just over 2 months ahead of the 2012 elections. Mm-hmm. This had huge potential to impact 2012. When I heard them say that some of the briefing for Susan Rice and people who were going to go on TV was done by David Plouffe, the big-time political strategist and advisor who probably knows about
2008 campaign manager.
Probably knows about as much of, and was in the White House, knows about as much about foreign policy as Donald Trump. He is sitting there trying to help fashion the message. I understand why they would want somebody like that there, because it's like, oh my God, we don't want this disaster to somehow turn the election, and that there's lessons to be learned from that, but we can't. I think that where the Republicans overreached was to think, hey, what can we hang on Hillary here? Answer, not much. What can we hang on Obama and the White House operation? More. And I'm guessing that Hillary breathes a sigh of relief, and others say, oh, okay, well, how much of this is new? How much is... They'll say there's nothing new and it's a waste of money, although they throw around the number of $7 million. Not that that's insignificant, but then I was thinking, so how do you get some context on $7 million? We spend $7 million on a lot of stuff that's of, I think, less value than this.
It is worth
study.
Knowing the Bengazi committee did reveal Hillary's private email server. That's how that bouncing ball went.
Yeah, that was just a little byproduct.
Yeah.
Carl Tubin.
It's the most important one, too.
I would hope that out of all this, they will take a look at embassies and different installations around the world, and they would look at it and say, what do we have to do to protect our ambassadors, our diplomats, and others in this situation, and tighten that up a little bit. A month ago we had a wake-up call as far as Orlando is concerned, and the fact that we know that the FBI knew about this guy, and somebody called in when he was trying to get armor, and they called the FBI, and evidently nobody responded to that. So I would hope that out of this comes more funding for our people who do this work internationally.
Admiral Kemp, the last word.
So when I consider, the fact that Chris Stevens, went to Bengazi for the most part on his own, I'm troubled by that, because one of the premier jobs in the United States Marine Corps is embassy guard duty. Every U.S. embassy, even the consulate down in Havana, has got a Marine detachment. I'd be curious to know who made the decision not to send a couple of Marines with him to at least give him some cover. I don't know what the budget is for that. I'm sure it's a matter of public record, but that's not the key here. The key is that this was a breakdown across several different departments, across several different folks in leadership, to basically give an American ambassador and his team the security cover that they needed when they went into hostile territory. And the resources are there. We all, most of us who've served in government know that sometimes it's okay, to get forgiveness on the back end of something, and waiting for permission sometimes really does cost.
Well, there's a couple of things on that. I mean, we do know this about, and this is just about Ambassador Stevens himself. He was apparently notorious for doing just this thing, going out with a small security detail so he could get as close to the people as he could. As security details are notorious for wanting to keep the protectee in a bubble, because that is how they keep them safest. But it's also how you keep them furthest from the people. But
but Ken's right. I mean, I've traveled with guns before, with some pretty impressive guns before, and I've been yelled at for stepping out of the hotel because the guns weren't with me. You're right. He should have had guns. He should have had a lot of guns. I mean, I had guns with me when I was in Honduras, Mexico City, Argentina. And those are the friendly ones. I'm not talking about the other ones that I went to as well, but there were guns. So why he didn't have guns is very surprising, and I hope they do ask that question.
Yeah. That question has to be answered, too.
Yeah.
And that will be the last word. But when we come back, the Supreme Court has spoken on a few key issues, and we'll be talking about the now vacated judgment against Governor Bob McDonnell, as well as the Texas abortion case, when we come back.